everyone, and Stephen, Christina, and I would first off like to welcome you and share our excitement that there is so much interest surrounding local food production. So we're going to be presenting, like Sheila said, on the interviews that Steve conducted this past couple of months. We're going to be presenting on the challenges and opportunities for local food production. We're going to be sharing with you the stories from the greater Chicago region. So we're going to start off giving you a little bit of context about the interviews, and then we're going to go straight into the major findings and bring out the voice from those interviews. So this is the greater Chicago region. It's made up of 14 counties spanning over 4 states, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. Within these 14 counties, we, along with graduate students from the College of Urban Planning and Policy, conducted 38 interviews, 13 of which were with planners, municipal and county planners, and 25 were with local food practitioners, ranging from nonprofit organizations to home practitioners or potential practitioners. So here are on this slide you can see the major challenges that we've identified through qualitative analysis and coding methods. All of this is from our interviews, and we're going to be mentioning a lot of things that have already been mentioned in the previous presentations, but I think this is going to really set the stage for the rest of the conference. So starting with, and they're in order of frequency, so starting with clear and inclusive ordinances, land access, zoning, costs and funding, farmer training and certification, water, insurance, processing, and distribution. And again, these are all from the interviews done with planners and practitioners. I lost my name tag. So during the rest of the presentation, we're going to be focusing actually on the voice from these interviews. So we're going to be, if you direct your attention to the slides, we're going to be showing you some major quotes that we've selected that we feel best represent the common trends and the common barriers and opportunities from the interviews. So starting with the most frequently mentioned issue, we have clear and inclusive ordinances. Many of the planners and practitioners mentioned a need for realistic regulations and clear ordinances. Also, they cover a wide variety of subjects. For example, farmers markets, plumbing, electricity, agricultural structures like hoop houses or greenhouses, water access and runoff, and even something that may seem as simple as fencing and shading. So because ordinances are not clear and don't necessarily directly cover all forms of local food activities or forms of food production, many of the food producers that we spoke with seemed concerned about the future of their enterprises. You know, they don't want to wake up one morning and find that an ordinance or regulation has changed and that their food production site can no longer exist. So without that security of inclusive laws, investment and improvements can be risky. So overall, the local food producers that we've interviewed in this study seem relatively unified in that view that additional inclusive and realistic regulations are needed in the support for the growth of local food production. But even before dealing with ordinances, local food practitioners need land, and land is expensive, and especially in urban areas, as most of us know. Many of the practitioners that we spoke with mentioned the opportunity of using vacant lots or brownfields, but using this land is expensive because cleaning the soil, bringing water access, and the high costs are not feasible for many. Also, we spoke with many of the practitioners that are using donated parkland, but different land comes with different regulations, and so in this example, practitioners using parkland may not be able to distribute their produce. They can't sell the produce that they grow on that land. So finding land and the right land is difficult. So as mentioned in the previous slide, land is expensive. And many of the practitioners that we spoke with don't actually own their own land, although many did express the desire to. Secure access to land for a substantial period of time is critical for local food production. Practitioners participating in this survey expressed insecurity about future land use because of these risky annual lease contracts that don't really ensure long-term stability. So the next issue I'd like to talk about this morning is zoning issues. As of yet, the greater Chicago area region does not have a zoning code that identifies urban agriculture as a primary land use. As such, many of the planners and practitioners we spoke with reported that the largest zoning-related barrier in their jurisdiction is that small-scale agriculture tends to be covered only as an accessory use. Therefore, local food production is largely limited to backyard gardens in many jurisdictions, which excludes the potential for the growth of community gardens or larger-scale local food production in urban areas. Zoning issues take many forms and vary between rural and urban areas. Many of the rural practitioners that we spoke with didn't actually report many zoning issues compared to the urban agriculturalists that we spoke with. Urban zoning codes tend to regulate types of growing and structures that are permitted on the land. In this example, the practitioner that we spoke with needed to become a technical college just to put up a greenhouse on his land. Most of the agricultural zoning land that we're used to in this country looks something like this, and you'll find if you drive about an hour out. But large lots like this are suited mostly for large community agriculture. But the local and urban agriculture enterprises, like the ones that we've interviewed for this survey, operate on a much smaller scale, and to use a lot like this it wouldn't be feasible. Additionally, many of the practitioners that we spoke with talked about using sustainable or environmentally sustainable practices, which are incredibly labor intensive and would just be difficult on such a large piece of land. So I'm going to give it to Christina to finish off the major issues.
And I'm sure it doesn't surprise many of us that one of the major barriers to local food production are costs and funding. As Amalia mentioned, with regard to land size, land is expensive. The taxes for which are also very costly, and add on the equipment that it takes to maintain that land, it becomes very expensive. Like all enterprises, cost and funding sources are extremely important. Additionally, our nation's food system is set up around commodities, such as support through subsidies. This means that local food producers have a much more challenging time finding long-term funding than do commodity producers. Another frequent issue which came up in our interviews as a challenge was the need for farmer training and certification. Food production is difficult, and it requires a really intense amount of training in order to grow efficiently and effectively. And the economic realities and the government has geared farmers towards specializing in commodity crops, which are primarily corn and soybeans in our region, as I'm sure most of you know. However, the reason we're here is that our food system needs a much larger variety of produce in order to increase access to fresh and local food supply, as opposed to simply commodity crops. Which would require a different kind of training system than that which is traditionally given to our agricultural producers. However, we found that with this concern with farmer training, that planners were especially concerned with the USDA Good Agricultural Practice Certification, the GAP program. Farmers need the certification in order to sell to the bigger distributors, as this is one of the primary ways that the government tries to ensure that food is safe to eat. So that was a planner concern, but as far as the local food producers go, they, on the other hand, are more concerned with getting organic certification, which, as you might see in the quote here, that is sort of a big task because of the paperwork. One of the farmers that we interviewed considers himself an organic farmer, but is unable to acquire the certification because of the extraneous amount of paperwork. Another major issue that came out of our interviews as a challenge to local food production is water access. Local food producers are not only concerned with getting access to water sources, but the affordability of it as well. Some growers are able to gain access to water, but at a hefty price tag. This grower had to pay $25,000, and this is an unaffordable price tag for most small-scale producers. And as a lot of us know as planners, runoff and stormwater is a major issue in planning for most urban areas. And in our interviews, planners expressed concern about water runoff, and contamination from local food producing sites. So the use of fertilizers and other contaminants is an issue that should be considered when creating new regulations around this topic. Insurance is another costly aspect of food production. Local food producers, small-scale producers, will need to purchase crop insurance, which is something typically geared towards commodities. They'll also need to buy traditional liability insurance, and some planners and practitioners both mention the need for insurance covering environmental liability. Finally, on our list of challenges that came out of our survey is the need for processing and distribution, as Ray Forgiani mentioned. While commodity farmers have formed co-ops which help them process and distribute their crops, small-scale producers don't have such a system readily available to them. So therefore, they are typically processing and trying to distribute themselves the produce that they harvest, which is a costly, time-consuming, and very labor-intensive process for a small enterprise. And local food producers are also facing a monopoly in the distribution to grocery stores, which is why they rely so heavily on farmers markets and U-pick systems. And also, as Mr. Forgiani mentioned, this might not be sufficient for income from solely a plot of land.